first of all. Today I'm gonna explain you a little bit my journey on podcasting, and maybe you've thought about starting your own podcasts, and I'll maybe be able to help you a little bit with that. But I'll essentially focus on two sides of podcasting, and the first one is obviously how you do a podcast, how you record, like all the technical details of how to make a podcast. And then the second part, and I guess most important, is why are you doing a podcast? Because depending on what are your objectives, it will drastically change the way you actually create your podcasts. We'll go through some easy ways to do it, or on the other hand, some more professional ways. I'm going to explain you a little bit, and hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to understand a little bit on where to start and what can you do to actually make your own podcast. Now, regarding the technical details on how to make a podcast, you'll first need to know what is the equipment that you'll need. You'll obviously need some equipment. You might not need to invest money to get your podcast running, or you might want to invest some money to get some equipment proper to do podcasting. Then you'll need to somehow edit your podcast. That means that you'll need some kind of software in your computer, or maybe not on your computer. You can do it also on your phone, but you need some sort of way to edit, to record and edit your podcast. And lastly, you need a way to send it to the world. Essentially, podcasting is an audio file, a digital audio file that is on the internet. So you'll need to be able to upload it to the internet and then share it with people. Now, why are you creating a podcast? And now I literally want to hear you if there's any of you that wants to start a podcast. And if you can actually share with me, I would appreciate.
Hi, someone...
Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for doing this and for sharing your knowledge with us. I actually was thinking about creating a podcast to explain the importance of communication, which is something that we work on here in Toastmasters in the medical and health area, which I work in. So that's one of the things I had in mind, but I want to know all the technical aspects. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, that's cool. That's a really, really interesting and valid reason why you want to start a podcast. There are other, and it doesn't have to be very ambitious. We might want to start a podcast because we want to have an archive of ideas, for instance, or we want to simply get better at public speaking. It's another way to actually practice our public speaking. We might want to put our feet in the radio host universe and feel how it is to be a radio host. Or we can just want to start a podcast because we want to be heard. And now it comes the tricky part. When we want to be heard, we need people to listen to us. And there are other platforms or other social media, let's call it like that, that have a simple, easier way to do it. Let's think of Facebook, for instance. You start a Facebook page, you have 0 friends, but you can actually connect with people. You can request friendship and you can start to build your network like that. If you start an Instagram account, you have 0 followers, but you can get in touch with other accounts. You can follow other people. You can like their pictures, and eventually you'll have followers into your accounts. Or on LinkedIn, that you can request connections, so you have a network of connections, professional networks. But all of these are two-way communication, so you can interact with other people and other people can interact with you. Now, with podcasting, there's a trick here, and it's not great, but it's a challenge. But on the other hand, it's something great, which means if we can succeed as a podcast, we gain a lot of things. With podcasting, you start with 0 listeners as any other thing, but you can't get in touch with other people. unless obviously you're in areas that people can find you. And that's where it comes the hard part, the tough part of starting a podcast. You'll need to create an audience, and your audience needs to come from somewhere. Now, if you think that you're on Spotify or on iTunes, which I'm going to explain you how to do it, there's a featured section, there's a place where these platforms recommend podcasts, but unless you're doing really, really well, you're probably not going to be featured. So don't expect to get an audience just from there, which is tough, but that means that we'll need to work along with other networks. That's where it comes the branding or personal branding. Now, if you want to start a podcast because you want to share whatever you think about the world, it's fine. On the other hand, you can want to create a podcast in a more business way. So you might have a company, or you might have your profession is related with a specific field, like Vanessa said, or even my example. So in that case, you want more of a branding, not personal branding. But all of this means that somehow you'll have more than just a podcast. So think of that as if you're a company and you want to sell your product, whatever that is, you want to reach people and you need to reach people. And podcasting can be just an extension of that. With my example, for instance, the podcast that I started was the first thing that I started. So there was no other company, even though I work in the beer industry, in the craft beer industry, there was Quem, bebe, gosto, the podcast that I run didn't exist, and there was no other networks. And that was tough to start to get listeners because I depended on my personal connection. So let's say Facebook and word of mouth. So, but then I understood that I needed to create other platforms to build an audience. That's when I started a Facebook account and an Instagram account just for the podcast. It can be any way. You can start with a podcast and then create the rest, or you can have the rest and then create a podcast as an extension of your brand. There's no right or wrong, but if you already have a brand and just want an extension, that'll be way easier for you to start an audience, to get an audience. One thing that is unique to podcasting is once you get the people to listen to your content, they'll actually listen to a lot of your content. If you think on Facebook, for instance, or Instagram, that we are always scrolling and our time span is very limited. So you might have tried to post something like a small text with 2 paragraphs and people might like it. But if you write 15 paragraph post, probably less people are gonna read it, and for sure a lower number of people will read until the end. This is the time span that people have on Facebook or on Instagram. When we move, for instance, to YouTube, people start to have a little bit more time to focus on your content. But when we're talking about podcasting, that's when people are ready to spend way more time listening to your content. That's why it's typical to have podcasts with 1 hour, some podcasts even with more than that. And I can assure you one thing, if people like your content, they'll start in whatever episodes and then they listen to another one and another one. And if they are not attached to a specific time frame, so if they don't lose the interest in a year, let's say, it's very probable that people are actually going to listen to all your content going back to the episodes that you started first, and sometimes they'll even listen to everything. And this is something really powerful and unique. As if you know different social media channels, this is something unique on podcasting. So if you succeed as a podcaster, that means that a lot of people, or some people, will actually listen to what you say. Now, what is a podcast? And a podcast is really simply audio file in digital format that is on the internet and that anyone can download. There's the subscription concept. That means that once you subscribe to a podcast, and that can be on your Spotify or iTunes or other platforms, that means that you're gonna get a notification or the episode that is subscribed is going to be automatically downloaded to your computer, phone, whatever, tablet, and you can listen to that right away. One thing that you might not know is that podcasting actually started in the 1980s. It was not called podcasting, it was called audio blogging. But not until we reached the year of 2004, 2005, when suddenly there started to be iPods, and with the iTunes, the concept of podcasting started to get traction, and it's closer to what it is right now. So it's not a new concept, but it gained a lot of popularity right now. And talking about popularity, the most popular formats or the most popular shows on podcasting, we start with radio shows. So anything that is broadcasted on a radio channel can be then downloaded or uploaded and then listened to in other times. This is the most common and popular format. So a lot of people are listening to radio on some other time. Another big area where the podcasting is huge is comedy. So in Portugal, for instance, there's a lot of comedians that they already have a following, they already have a lot of a big audience, but they jump into the podcasting where they can actually talk for longer and engage with their community in a different way. Usually podcasting is not as curated as a video, for instance, because people are not just so focused on that, but it's more extended and people feel more natural talking. And when your audience actually values that, it's really important to have that. Then business and education, it's another big range of, there's another big range of podcasts that are big there, where people are just sharing educational concepts or interviewing influential people in different industries. Then interviewing, and there's also comedians doing that, or some of the shows are on radio, but a lot of podcasting that is done just for podcasting, so it's not on a radio station or there's no audience. It starts as an interview, and it's an interviewing podcast, which is, I think, one of the easiest way to start podcasting. And then lastly, storytelling, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. There's actually a really nice podcast called The Moth, where just storytellers from around the world go to stages, and for a few minutes they tell a story. And it's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. It's called The Moth. Now we're getting into making your own podcast. What do you need? And the first thing, obviously, you'll need a microphone. And when you think of a microphone for podcasting, you think of a kind of a radio microphone. So this is one of the microphones that I have, and it's similar to a radio microphone. This is actually a pricey one, but this is a similar one that I've used also in some of the interviews that costs way less. And this is a condenser microphone, so it gives you like a really nice, warm voice, and it's similar to what you feel on a radio station, and it actually helps you to understand your voice better. When you're close to a microphone, you can actually play with your voice much differently than what we are used with different microphones. But you can also have like just some kind of normal microphone. So this is a dynamic microphone, as you've seen anywhere, and you can also use one of these. The thing here with these microphones that I have, at least, is that they have a XLR connection. So this is kind of a connection that you use on just shows or anything, or you can also just use in this case, in a podcast. But all of these mics are, they are not digital, they are, I'm missing the word, analogic. So by being analogic, you need to convert the sign into digital. So this is one mixer, that's a mixer that I have, and it's essentially you connect the microphones via XLR, and then you transform that via USB into digital connection. But before I lose you, let me tell you that you can actually just get a microphone exactly the same as this, but you can connect that via USB. So that means that you don't need all the things that I have here. It's just that once I got this equipment, I wanted something that could be used not just for podcasting, but some other things. That's what I've done. If you want to start a podcast at your home, you can just get a microphone via USB. You can get some pretty cheap deals. You don't need to spend more than 50 euros if you want to get just a simple setup with good enough quality. Some of these microphones, the cheaper ones, sound reasonable enough for the price, so you don't have to spend a lot of money. Then you'll need software to edit your podcast, and that's what I already explained to you that you can do on your computer, but you can also do it on your phone if you want to go on a minimal kind of way. And lastly, you need a place to publish your content. So that means that you can either be Spotify or iTunes or Anchor or any other platform. So there are people that actually can find your content, or you can have your own website and just upload that file and people can find it via that way. Now let me share the screen so you can actually see some of the software that you can use. I guess you can see it right now. Can you see it? Okay. So this is the software that I use to edit my podcasts. This is a paid software. If you're aware of the Adobe collection, it's a really powerful range of software that you can use not only to edit audio, but video and photo. Photoshop, you probably heard, that's part of the Adobe collection. This is a really powerful software. I use it because I already have access to that because of the work that I do. So I use that. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't spend, I think it goes as low as 20 euros per month. So it's pretty pricey to just invest that for a podcast. So then there's also open source softwares. This is Audacity. It's an open source. It's for free. The interface doesn't look very modern, that's true, but it does essentially the same as other softwares. So you don't really need that much. You just need to record. Once you connect your microphone, you can start recording, and then you can cut the audio when you want. You can even put different tracks. So let's say that you want to have a low soundtrack music on the back, or you want to just add some music for a specific thing, or even if your podcast is being sponsored, so you want to add a clip of 15 seconds in the middle of the podcast, you can do it all right here on Audacity. But I know that some of you are thinking that this is a lot of work and I'm not familiar with these tools and this is too hard. So let me show you something way easier. Anchor, it's one of the platforms that has grown a lot, and recently it was bought by Spotify in a way to get together the creators on Spotify and reinforce the podcasting on Spotify that until now it wasn't that strong. Anchor, it's an app that you can install on your phone, and with that you can record your podcasts on your phone. You can edit it on your phone, and you can publish right via the app. So using Anchor, and it's really, really simple. I was actually testing it just before today, so to explain you a little bit, and I'm gonna show you how that works. So essentially, you install the app, and the only thing that you need to do is click on the plus sign and start recording. This is using your microphone from the phone. You can use different microphones to have better quality, but it's as simple as that. Once you're done recording, you click on save, and this is where you have your file. You name it. In this case, I named it intro, and it was just the intro, and I can then just keep on adding more chapters. And then when I hit publish, I can just write the title and the description and the season and the episode number and all these things right in your phone. So if you're not sure how you can start, this is a really, really nice way to start without having to spend a lot of money or a lot of resources. There's no excuses here. Now, I want you to ask if there are any questions so far. Okay, no questions, I guess, so far. So I'm gonna just proceed. Some of you might have read an article that I wrote for Toastmasters Iberia, where I was explaining the 6 reasons why you should start with podcasting. And one of those reasons was something that I found when I started the podcast, which is, and mostly when you niche down, when you are just, member of a community and you give something to that community, people will appreciate you. People will come to you and say that the fact that you're doing an interview to some people that they might not know, or you're just teaching them something that they didn't know, people are going to really appreciate that. And I learned that by doing it, and it was super powerful. So with that, you need to know first, why are you doing that? And then what you want to achieve with that by doing a podcast. How are you going to add value? And when you are able to answer these questions, if some of your questions were actually give and community, you probably succeed as a podcast. As Vanessa said, as I identify myself with a certain niche, a certain community, I try to give value to the craft beer industry in Portugal. And that's by interviewing some of my peers or some company owners that I want to know something more about their brands or some new beer release, something like that. And I'm sharing that with the world because I want to know, but also there's a lot of people that actually want to know that as well. So it's important when you start a podcast, you'll actually understand that other people will appreciate what you're doing. Now, another thing that I learned when doing a podcast was the rule or the golden rule of consistency. I don't know about you, but I can procrastinate a lot. And when I don't have certain objectives, I tend to just postpone things. One thing that I obligate myself to do with these podcasts is that every other week on Tuesdays, 6:30 in the afternoon, I'm posting a new podcast. And with these, I actually spend a lot of nights going to bed pretty late just to make sure I go to sleep with everything scheduled to be posted on the day after. And as you might imagine, with that, I also needed to learn to accept things not being perfect. I don't know about you again, but I can be really picky when, making something. And that means that I wouldn't really post something that if it's not perfect. But once I've got a deadline, and in this case, it's always a new deadline coming, that means that I'm gonna accept some content that I'm not absolutely happy with that, but I'm happy enough. That was really important for me to keep pushing and keep making more content. And I think it might help you as well with that. One thing that I was really, really surprised is that other people want to join your battle. So on my journey on these 2 years of having a podcast, I had people coming to me and say, I want to help you. I want to be part of this. So suddenly the community that was bigger, the craft beer community, suddenly there's a smaller community that is my team community, or people that are inspired by what they were seeing, what they were listening. And that meant that suddenly I'm not just doing this myself, but I actually have the help of other people to do that. And guess what? There's no money involved most of the times because podcasting is not really profitable. yet, or there are some ways, but most of the times it isn't. So I don't have money to pay other people. Other people are happy to just volunteer, as any of us on Toastmasters. And that's something really powerful and interesting, and makes you believe in what you're doing when you're seeing people that wants to help you because they are inspired by what you do. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is think of a brand. Now, with this, it's hard to think of something small like that, or it might not be if you have already a brand. But if you want to be heard by other people, it's really, really important that you actually think as a brand. Think of ways to grow, think of ways to, just reach other people. I remember someone telling me, I think it's Antonio Mendes, telling in a Toastmasters session a few weeks ago that there are some people that you think that are unreachable, but sometimes it only takes a message or something and you actually get to that people. When you think as a brand and you think of a mission, it's easier to just reach out to people, and sometimes you'll be surprised that people actually are willing to help you and willing to participate in your podcast, being as a guest, or helping you out in some way. So this is really important. Podcasting, it's a community. There are smaller communities, our niche communities, but podcasting is a global concept, and a lot of people would be happy just to participate in your podcast, to be a guest. So keep that in mind, that you can actually reach people, and some people will be happy to take your invitation and join you in your cause. So that's something really important. And lastly, think about the objectives that you want, being that you want to create a community, and that can be more into the personal side, or if you're actually thinking on an industry, you want to create a community, and potentially you'll be able to then create some or monetize the podcast in some ways. And it doesn't have to be direct, but sometimes by talking about a brand or talking about a product that you sell on your podcast, you're able to monetize that. It's pretty hard to monetize podcasting, at least in Europe. In the US, it's pretty common. I think the more podcasting grows in Europe, the more chances there are. In Portugal, it's the reality that I know. There are some comedians already have sponsored podcasts, and we're seeing that more and more. So I think that's something that you might want to keep in mind. Think as a brand and plan your objectives. Now, I started by saying that you needed to have an audience or create an audience. And this was something that I didn't have before. So I explored some of my personal networks on my social media and word of mouth, and the fact that I work in the industry, and just being back in time where we could go to bars and talk about that. And then people actually share that. But if you want to get to a bigger audience, and when you niche down, there are so many people interested in that topic, you'll need to go online. And that's when it's really, really important to get a Facebook or Instagram page, or any other networks for that instance. But like Facebook and Instagram, it's a must if you want to think of a brand. In my specific case, I use Facebook mostly to share the podcasts, or in this case, I do video as well. I do video casting, let's call it like that, or just audio. So I can use the Facebook page just to share the links. While on Instagram, for instance, I can't share links. So instead, what I do is I create teasers. So like, let's say a 30-second or 1-minute teaser of what that podcast was, some catchy phrase. So people are actually curious, and they will eventually go through the work on clicking on your bio and then going to your podcast, being on video or audio. So that's something really important to think, is using networks. Another thing that I've been doing lately on Instagram is sharing educational content. And that's where I started to think more as a brand and not just as a podcast. So suddenly I was creating 1-minute or 30-second videos teaching about simple things about, let's say, on craft beer what kind of glasses there is on craft beer, or why you should go to a bar instead of drinking at home, for instance. So these small concepts, they aren't on podcasting. And that's where I started to understand that this is more than just a podcast. It's a brand, and some platforms require different content. What I learned with this is that suddenly I was growing my audience on Instagram, and that was pushing people to listen to my podcasts. So again, don't be afraid to create content that serves just one platform. If you are giving value to a community, you're probably gonna reap some benefits from that. So think of that not just as the podcast, but as a brand. Now, as I was mentioning, I also have the podcast in video. So YouTube is another way to publish your podcast. Now, something that I learned was that sometimes people that I knew, they wanted to listen to my podcast, but they weren't aware on how to actually listen to a podcast. They didn't know they could go on, or they should know they needed to go to Spotify, for instance, or iTunes, or they didn't know. And once I started to upload stuff to YouTube, suddenly there was another audience that was there. What happened as well is that I lost some of the people that were listening on Spotify, or just the audio, the podcast. They shifted to YouTube, but in the end, there was more people listen to that. Now, again, I don't want to make it tough for you. You're just overwhelmed with how to create a podcast, and now I'm talking about video. You don't need to worry about that. Just keep in mind that you can just use your cover image, for instance, and just publish a video on YouTube that is just sound. So in this way, you can actually reach more people. Now, again, whatever you want to do it, and it can be just something simple as a collection of ideas, something you've been thinking of, and you just have it written on a paper, and you want to, share that with not a lot of people, some people, or you just want to have it online. Or maybe you want to improve your public speaking, or you want to put your feet into a radio host position. That's something that I never thought before. And suddenly I was caught in this adventure, and I was starting thinking, well, I could be a radio host, for instance. Obviously, it's not just starting a podcast. You need to learn a lot of things, the radio language and all that kind of things. But podcasting for me opened a window of opportunities. I suddenly started to talk in front of a camera and things that we as Toastmasters work, but it was further than that. So creating content for Instagram, for instance, turning your phone back to you and doing a small story, just publicizing the next episode you're doing or something like that. That's something that we don't learn on Toastmasters, and I suddenly was doing that. So that's something that you learn on the way. But honestly, like, you start to see new possibilities once you start a podcast, because actually there's no other way. You'll start to learn and enjoy the process, and suddenly you're caught in learning how to better, do your job as a radio host, and you just learn more and more. But essentially, like, as I've told you before, you can go on something, expensive and, difficult to work with and be very professional. And that's a way to do it. If you're doing that for a brand, for instance, or if you want to be really professional, that's something to do. And you'll spend plenty of hours, curating your content and preparing it, editing, publishing. Or if you don't want to go through all that work, you can start with a smaller, simpler way. And Anchor, it's a perfect way to start. I'm not sponsored by Anchor. I don't use it myself. I just thought that I would bring that to you because it's a really simple tool. And I think it doesn't just, it's not as tough to think. It's something that you can start easily. So that's the challenge that I leave you. If you have a will to start a podcast, try it, soon, try it right now. It doesn't have to be perfect. You'll improve as you go, but I think you should give it a try, because it's awesome when you actually have people listening to you and spending hours listening to your content, and you're actually, affecting people's life in a positive way and giving to a community. I guess that's the most important thing. So if you think of starting a podcast, start it now. Thank you. Now, I'm sure plenty of you might have some questions, so I would just love to give you some thoughts, or anyone that wants to share. I see Scarlett wants to put a question, so yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot for this webinar. It's super useful. Thanks a lot for bringing us so much clarity. But I'm a little bit overwhelmed, and I would like to know how much time do you spend on your podcast, creating, editing, creating the social media content? How much time do you need?
So the content that I was usually creating, it was like an hour long, or not, it was a little bit less than an hour per episode. It was like 50 minutes podcast. So when we think of a podcast, and this applies to some other mediums, video, it's the same thing. But when you're doing an interview, it means that you need to, communicate with the guest and asking them to go to your show. You need to prepare a script. You need to record that, and it can be as simple as you have all the setup ready, and it can be pretty simple, minimal setup, or it can be like a more complex setup. You record that, then you edit that, and then you have to publish that. Usually, I remember to be in a podcasting group and telling people that 8 hours for me was just kind of the bare minimum to publish a 50 minutes, and people were like, "What? Why are you spending so many time?" And that's really what I want you to think, is that you don't have to spend 8 hours. You can literally just spend, if you're doing a 50 minutes interview, like think of that as Instagram Live, for instance. You need to prepare your content, perhaps, or you might just go freestyle a little bit, and then you record and it's uploaded. When you're doing live stream, you just need to prepare it previously, and then you're live. There's the risk of being live, but you're live, and then it's published and it's done. Then you spend a little time to replicate that content into other networks, perhaps, or not. But like, honestly, you can just go freestyle and don't spend too much time, or you can spend plenty of hours. I'm quite a perfectionist, so I spend too much time, honestly, creating these podcasts, but that's something that I enjoy doing. So in the end, I actually gain from doing that. But the consistency helped me to just accept that some things wouldn't be perfect, and I think that was really important for me, just to keep pushing content.
Hello. Oh, okay.
Perhaps? Oh yeah, no. Come on, please, Viola.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. We are planning to do a podcast in our Toastmasters club, and there are some questions that arise. One of them is related to the frequency. What do you suggest? Each week, each 2 weeks? And another question is, how long do you think is the best time to make the podcast? 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 15 minutes? What do you suggest to begin? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I guess you need to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve? Like, first, what kind of podcast is that? Can I ask you? Is it like an interview style?
Yes. It's an interview. We already made a test with 30 minutes, and I believe it's too much, but I would like to know your experience, because we heard so many podcasts and we have to select them, and perhaps the time is it's a critical factor. I don't know, but what do you think?
So I think podcasting is actually one of the platforms that people have more time to listen to. You might, depending on the podcast that you might listen, you might see yourself listening to 5-minute podcasts. And when I do that, for instance, some comedy shows or something, some 5-minute radio things, I'll be listening to 3 or 4 or 5 at the same time, because the moment that I listen podcasts, it's when I'm cooking. So I've got like half an hour or an hour listening to podcasts. But I've seen myself, some of the examples that I gave you before, I've seen myself listening to a comedian that he has like 150 episodes of an hour. And, I liked one and I liked the previous one and another one. And then I listened to like the whole 150 episodes. I went back to listen to all of them. And I'm not the only one. So timing, it's really, it varies of your content and of your public. What I didn't want to do in my specific case, I never made a podcast that was longer than an hour. Well, I've done one, but before I didn't want to do it because I don't like to listen to podcasts that are longer than an hour. I won't listen to them. So, but I think it's more like whoever you're interviewing, think of them like what kind of questions you're going to make. If you like, you shouldn't make it longer just because you want to make it longer. Think of how many questions you want to make, and because literally you can spend 3 hours speaking to someone, and that can still be interesting, but that means that you're just spending a lot of time preparing the interview. Or you can do like a 15 minutes sprint interview, and that can be pretty interesting, and you just get to the juice of that. Or even you can make a 1 hour interview and then trim it to just the best 3 questions. So it really depends on you. What I would say is, like, if you're thinking of Facebook, for instance, if you would publish something on Facebook, like I would not do more than 10 minutes, for instance.
10 minutes, okay.
But that's on Facebook, for instance. But like on a podcast, I think half an hour for an interview, it's pretty good. More than that can be interesting. One thing that I against me, when people have something to say, let them share. But most importantly, and that I learned in the hard way, listen to what people are saying. Like literally, it's pretty tough. Mostly if you're recording that by yourself, it's really, really tough. Like you're just thinking of, is it recording? If you're doing video, it gets even worse. And in this case, how's the connection? And what's the next question? And you just don't listen to the people, to what people say. And it's terrible. And once you edit that, you'll just understand how many interesting conversations you missed with that. So really pay attention to that. And 30 minutes might be enough. So I don't think there's a sweet spot as there is in YouTube. In YouTube, you know that between 8 minutes to 13, it's the sweet spot. On Instagram, nobody will see something more than 1 or 2 minutes. But in the podcasting, I think you can allow yourself to have a longer time. So something from 30 minutes to an hour, I think it's the sweet spot for my taste.
Okay, and the frequency? 1 week? No.
It depends. It, again depends on depends of you. The more you do, the more you grow. For sure, it will be tough to make a podcast per day. So I think it's more, who are you going to interview? How many people? Think of that as a season. Think of that. Plan a year long. And if you plan a year long, if you're doing once a week, you'll have 52 episodes. Like this is really important. Like before you start a podcast, you think of that as a season, and think that think 20 episodes ahead. You might not have talked with those people before, but put a calendar. That's really important, because suddenly you'll understand, okay, I don't have 52 people to talk about that are interesting. So you might want to adapt that or not. There might be unlimited people. So I guess it really depends of I chose to be bi-weekly, so two times a month, just because I didn't want to spend every week preparing a podcast. So yeah, that was my choice. But if I would do every week, I would probably grow more audience. So yeah.
Okay, and what do you recommend to promote the podcast? Some CEO investments? No.
I guess, well, it's really, it depends on where your audience or your target is. I think Vanessa can or she have done a webinar about, you know, Facebook ads and stuff, and more than just the Facebook ads, it's understanding who's your target, and when you know who's your target, you can target to them. So you know, if you want to, depending on the content you're doing, and think if you think you need to think of, you know, the age of your target and who's that people, and you know, where are they living or whatever. You know, there are different ways to market. In this case, for instance, and I don't say this to many people, I started with a podcast on TikTok, and the growth is absolutely incredible. I honestly think there's room for us as Toastmasters to build content for TikTok. Something as simple as look to the camera, you know, don't put your hands in your pockets. Like, I think there's like a giant room for growth on TikTok. And, you know, just this weekend, I matched the same number of followers. I got like 1,500 followers on Instagram. I now have 1,600 followers on TikTok. And I just started like a month ago or 2 months ago. So I think there's a lot of room for that. But again, you know, I needed to find the targets, and on TikTok, I'm doing kind of content that is easier, while on YouTube, I'm making content that is tougher. On podcasting, it's content that mostly beer geeks will want to hear. So I think it really depends of your target. Once you know your target, you'll know if you should be on Facebook or on Instagram or perhaps on TikTok.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see two other people with their hands raised. I don't know who was first, but let's go with the one that I see here, Antonio Mendes.
Hi, Tiago, was amazing your explanation, and give to us lots of thinkings, because regarding everything what you said, I think the most important is the focus. Okay. Because if you want to have awareness in a weekly basis or 2 weeks basis, is the focus. It's the way that the people expect when see or hear your first time podcast. I'm going to hear this guy again. So I think this is the focus. It's very important, and of course use all of the connections that each one have on Instagram or in Facebook to replicate. For me, the main point is the beginning is the procrastination. When I'm going to have the first test to understand the real time I spend, and sometimes it's not so. I've started to hear how to build a podcast, but I think in my case, because I have the other things, as you know, needs to spend lots of time. So, but again, to resume what the amazing explanation you have said, is the focus is to be attractive for who wants to hear me or hear us or hear whatever. Okay. And I think it's to think very well what are the kind of message or the kind of interview, what kind of the subjects that give the attention, even is a short people, but at least I can understand that this is what they want to hear. Okay. So the focus for me, it's the subject, what I want to give the message. I think it's the most important.
One thing, for instance, in your case, that you're doing, live streaming, interviews in live streaming, for instance, there might be room to actually replicate that content into podcasting.
Yeah.
Now, again, you can replicate your content to any platform. It's the difference between spending 1 hour or spending 8, and you know that. And sometimes I want to replicate the content into as many platforms, and we need to be smart about that. But sometimes sometimes I listen to a podcast, or I prefer to listen to a podcast, and I wouldn't listen to that on YouTube, for instance, because I need to have the app open. So I'll rather listen to a podcast. So sometimes having the content duplicated, it might be interesting. With the procrastination, we all are procrastinators. I think it's really that's what it is. So it's more about when we are able to focus on, that's why for me, like it worked as, having a podcast released every other week. That meant that I needed to do that. That also meant that some weekends that I could go to the beach, I wasn't doing that, or just doing anything else because I needed to finish the editing or whatever. But that also meant that I was delivering content every other week. And if there wasn't with focus, and I would probably procrastinate. So I think it's really important. Thanks for your feedback.
One question: do you think that the way we speak when the people don't see our image, our video, it's a little different from the video casting? For sure, and mostly because of these guys. So like, the fact that you have a condenser microphone means that, and it's really interesting, like anyone that goes to a radio station or whatever, or actually is doing a podcast. In my case, I was having guests coming to the studio, and I just make them put the headphones and listen to yourself. If the microphone is here, you're gonna just hear something voice from the end. But like if you're here, then you suddenly start to hear that warm voice like you hear on the radio. And that was really interesting. And that's when you understand that being a radio host, the part of the voice, it's just sometimes you just need a microphone. Obviously there's much more than that. But once you get close to the microphone, your voice sounds way different. And when I started to do podcasting with video, I still have the same microphone in front of me, but then there's the balance between, do you want to just have a perfect sound, or do you want your guests to be comfortable? Because then if the microphone is too close to them, they'll be like, just, I don't know, like, they'll feel the pressure that they don't have to feel. So it's a matter of balance. I'll rather have a nice conversation than perfect, immaculate sound. But for sure, like if you have a podcasting mic or a condenser mic, and you'll talk close to that, it's different. And the podcasting is it's the same thing as radio, but usually radio, we are listening as we go to work or whatever. And podcasting, perhaps you're listening when you go to bed or whatever. And there's someone actually talking to your ears, and that's really powerful. And if you work your voice correctly, like it's really powerful. So I think definitely there's it's different to just to talk to a camera or to actually talk to a microphone when nobody is watching. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Vanessa. Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And we've had a few conversations as well on this topic. And, I'm going to pick your brain a lot before I finally decide to go forward with my own thing. Sure. Once upon a time, eventually. What I really wanted to ask you is, so you opted for this interview version versus the, just produce a shorter content like you would like prepare a speech for a Toastmaster session and just, go with it and record that. And my question is there any advantage for one version or the other, or maybe a mix between the two when you're starting out? Do you get more followers because it's an interview and you go and get the followers of the person you're interviewing if they're a key opinion leader in your niche? Is there any advantage?
So what I learned is that my community growed, really slowly over time. I've been podcasting for about 2 years, and that was just interviewing. So that meant that the people that wanted to hear that was either, my mom, obviously, but, the people that knows us and that care about us, they'll be interested in that. And then there's some people that are generally interested either on your view of a specific topic, or, someone, the other person that you're interviewing. And yeah, so either one or the other, people will, enjoy to learn about that. I was just, you unpin you lower your hand and I lost you. I'm back on you. Sorry. Now. So regarding the content, like interviewing, it's great for people that are in the industry. You listen to, really interesting stuff, but it takes longer to create an audience. I think what I learned recently is when I'm just providing educational content, and that's really easy to see content, educational content, like in 30 seconds or 1 minute, you take something home and you're good to go. Like I'm getting a lot of new people that wouldn't go there otherwise. I'm just interested to understand now, how can I blend those people that don't have much time to, to learn about beer and to just want to see a minute-long thing with 50 minutes of content. And I'm actually going through a kind of transformation right now by, I stopped doing interviews right this moment, and I'm thinking more on, how can I create content that is differently, that I provide value and it's target for more people. That's where I am right now. That's why I haven't posted something in the last probably couple months on podcasting. But then suddenly I'm creating different kinds of content for the podcasting. For instance, I've just done a debate on, how's the IPA style evolving and whatever, if it's classic or more modern, something like that. Mm-hmm. So I gather 4 people talking about the same topic, and that is going to be very valuable to some people, but maybe not as valuable to, to a bigger crowd. So I think it's really, really important to have different kinds of content, but you can, if you want to simplify and if you're smart enough, you can, just trim a bit of the interview, grab what's important and deliver that in a 1-minute piece content. I think that's what a lot of people should do. If you have the chance to create 2 kinds of content, that's fine. One thing that I learned, honestly, and that's my view, and I think that's the view of more people, is if you have an Instagram account, like let's call it influencer. You're an influencer, you have 15K people following you on Instagram, you're an influencer, but then suddenly you start a podcast and you got something, it's more solid. If you go to an interview and say that I have 50 people following me on Instagram, that might not mean as much as having a podcast. And you might just have a podcast and not have an audience at all. Like nobody knows how many people it's tough to know how many listeners you have on podcasting. So there's the credibility there without the the number checking kind of thing. And I think it's really solid, important to have a podcast, and it opens you more doors than just having a lot of followers on Instagram, for instance. So I think there's room for both. I think both are really important. I just think that people shouldn't skip the podcasting because there isn't a lot of listeners. It's really meaningful when you actually have someone that listens to you for 15, 20, 1 hour, and then goes back to all your podcasts and listens to 50 hours of your content. That's really powerful, and it doesn't happen in other networks.
For sure. And in terms of the time you spend doing the actual script, does it take you less time preparing an interview or just preparing your own raw content to, do the thing alone?
In this case, much less to prepare my own content because it's 1 minute long.
Okay.
Although
but if you had like a 20-minute podcast.
Sure. Well, that's something that I'm starting to do in this case for YouTube. More kind of a talking head for 20 minutes. And I think, well, I don't know, like it took me a lot of time to record because I'm not used to, just talk to a camera, and there was a lot of things. The script wasn't really ready when I was recording. I thought I would just go with the flow, and then you end up spending way more time. The interview, it's tough when you don't know people. I was lucky to know most of the people, so it was kind of easy. It was, like you need to do some research, but it didn't take that much time. But I think, right now, like creating content that I know, I think it's easier because you can just read somewhere, like you can read a book and then you get inspiration and you organize by topics and it's kind of easier. An interview might take you more time, but I guess this is like skills, like if you know what questions you should ask to people, perhaps it will be easier to prepare an interview. While the thing here is like, if you're not an expert, and I think that's the most important thing, is like, if you're not an expert, you can do an interview, you can't create educational content. So this is, if you're just curious, in the craft beer industry, there are some people that, are creating content, and I love to see that content. They are not experts, and it's fine because they are interviewing people. If you're humble enough to, give space to those people, you're going to shine because you're being the voice, and you don't need to have a lot of knowledge to do that. So I guess that's a really nice question because of that. If you are an expert, you can create your own content. But I think I think both are art, I guess.
They have both, pros and cons, right?
I guess, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tiago, we are getting to an end, I guess. It was very interesting. I don't know if anyone else has a question. I'm pretty sure Tiago will have the answer. Okay, I guess that is all for today. Tiago, I want to thank you. It was an amazing webinar. We have learned a lot about you. And now we know that you are the expert on podcasts around Iberia. So many people are going to reach you, I'm pretty sure. I'm having some people asking me your contacts. So you are an influencer for sure.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a way to share my contacts. So if anyone actually, have any question, is starting a podcast, wants some feedback, reach out to me, feel free. I'm gonna, or Vera, please share my contents then. And yeah, I would love you to listen to my podcast as well. I guess the Portuguese part will enjoy it easier because it's in Portuguese, but I trust that some of you in Spain will be able to understand that as well. And if you're into craft beer, I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So yeah, I'm gonna share the contents, and I would love you to reach out if you have any questions. So yeah.
Okay.
So and thank you very much for the opportunity.
It was a pleasure for us. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to share your contacts. I'm going to do that for sure. And again, we are going to add this webinar to our YouTube channel. You can go there and check everything. And maybe we are going to have another webinar soon. I don't know. I'm running out of ideas here. So if you have any idea, if you know someone that could give us a great webinar around anything, I guess. So please feel free to reach me. Tell me, I want to make a webinar. I want to share something. I know the person who will do that on a brilliant way. So please do that. If you don't have any questions, or I don't have any answers now also. So I want to thank you again, and we are going to meet soon in our next webinar. Have a great weekend and a great week. See you soon.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.